And we'll be focusing on the topic of moving from analyzing into feeling, sensing. You can call it the journey from the mind into the heart. And there's a lot on this topic that can be covered. So I'm curious to see if you have any specific questions. What I want to cover a little bit about is probably why I'm talking about it in this way. I mean, there are a lot of teachers and practices and resources out there talking about embodiment, talking about releasing emotions. And some of them you will hear say, oh, it's all about embodiment. It's not until we really drop into our body that it kind of matters. And I get that idea, but there's not a point to be made here. And it is that many of us, and I think many of us in the self-mastery community, come from a very analytical place. We have been relying on our intellect. Many of us have had jobs like that, or just enjoyed the whys, like understanding how things are put together and how they work and why we're practicing certain things and not others. And that's why we enjoy the self-mastery approach of like, okay, now I really understand my mind. I understand why it's doing what it's doing. And with that map, with that image, now it's easier for me to make my way out of it or commit to these practices. And if you've heard people talking about trauma and healing trauma, often mention there it's important to have a safe space to heal that trauma from. Like whether that's a physical space, like you're setting up your home and your room and in a way that's like, I feel safe here. I can be here. I can start moving out of my old box and into something new. I can start letting go of old patterns. And I think of the mind for us analytical people in the same way. It's our safe place. It's a place where we've escaped things that have felt frightening or unsafe or dangerous, whether that's trauma or not, or just felt like uncertain, just felt we don't know what's going to happen there. And we've built some confidence instead in our intellect and in managing things and in controlling tasks and things like that. So I know for myself, an approach where someone just told me, well, just stop analyzing and start feeling, would never have worked. I would never have been able to take that advice because that would have been one, too big of a step for me because it wouldn't have felt safe. And I didn't know how to do it. Someone telling me to just drop into my body and start feeling, I didn't know how that worked. Well, what are the steps? Give me the manual, please. So I think it's important to say that instead of fighting the mind, or instead of trying to say like, oh, the mind is all bad and stop analyzing and don't do that. No, take the mind on board. Bring the mind on board. Because if the mind gets a little more quiet, a little more safe, if it knows what we're doing, if it understands, okay, what are the impacts of dropping into your body and start feeling? What's happening? What will be likely to happen? What are resistance that will show up? And this is a step-by-step guide on how to be with that. Okay, now the mind has an understanding and it's like, I can be on board. Now we've created that safe place, that safe container of having the mind on board. So for me, it tends to be a little red flag rising when anyone's talking about this or that. This is better than that. We shouldn't be doing this. We should be doing that instead. It's like, no, yeah, the journey, if you want that experience of more of your full being, definitely will go through your body. But take your mind with you as you slowly let go of some layers of the mind and dropping out of the identification with it, because it's not the mind itself, it's more our relationship with it that makes a difference. Yeah. There's someone, Norm, commenting here in the chat, like, that's for sure is what drew me to Gary's course in the first place. Yeah, that analytical approach and that understanding that why, and someone really giving that description on both what's happening and this is how the steps to get out of it. Okay, so let's see if there are some questions here. And for anyone who just joined, yeah, you're welcome to just raise your hand if you want to come on and ask anything, or just type it in the chat and we'll try and get to as many questions as possible. Let's see where it takes us. So Jody's asking, can you talk about resistance in the body that shows up as 1, numbness or lack of feeling, and also 2, the feeling of stuck energy and how to be with it and allow it while also releasing the stored energy? Feel juxtaposed. Okay, great. So first of all, then, talking about resistance as number 1, numbness or a lack of feeling. So let me know if there's anyone else in here that recognize that. Like, oh, I'm gonna go sit with my emotions, and I go sit and I feel, but there's nothing there. Or you might have an idea that I probably have some, stored anger or something else going on in there. There should probably be sadness because of things that have happened that I never allow myself to feel. But how do I access it? Because when I try, there's nothing. There's no response. So there's a few ways to go about that. I mean, and first is always to recognize that. And now the question is, how do you relate to that recognition? So if you say, oh, there should be sadness here, I can't find any, it's just numb, damn it, I must be doing something wrong. Well, is there another welcoming that you can do of that recognition? So, because that's the first step of realizing that, okay, there's a numbness there. And I often advise or invite you to be with that experience. Because, yeah, you're setting the intent to get in touch with your anger or your sadness or whatever it is. That doesn't mean that it will happen right away. But setting that intent and saying, I want to feel it, I want to invite it in, that's the first step. Then what will show up is your way there. So exactly like we talked about in a few episodes ago of what shows up in the way is actually the way. So now if you're experiencing numbness, it's like that is there to be seen. It has a message for you. It says something about how that anger or that sadness has been treated. So I always invite and encourage to be curious about that experience of numbness, Because often we're like, I can't feel anything. There's nothing there. And then I ask, what does that nothing feel like? Because a numbness is not nothing, you know? So usually it's not so much nothing as something. Usually there is a something, but it's not what we expected. So we're like, I can't feel anything. So the invitation is to be curious about the numbness and see if you can feel it as much as possible. Like, where is it in the body? How strong is it? Is there any other qualities to it that you can detect, that you can sense? Is it like a wall, don't come close, stay away kind of feeling? Is it a goo? Like what's the quality of that numbness? And when you poke around on it, what happens? So that lack of feeling or that numbness is again something that needs to be seen, something that can be investigated, something that you can be curious about on your pursuit of getting in touch with that emotion. And it probably tells something about how your protection mechanisms have been dealing with that emotion before. Okay. And then to number 2 here, a feeling of stuck energy and how to be with it and allow it while also releasing the stored energy. Okay, so that's a really good question, and actually a question that I got from a client before this that I was gonna bring up. And the question was, is the only way to be with an emotion to kind of sit with it, be still and just sit and feel it? And no, it's not. So being with doesn't mean that you're kind of just still and frozen and like, okay, where is it? Where is the emotion? And just be with it, sit with it in that way. No, being with it can be moving. Being with it can go out and take a boxing class. Being with it can be going out, take a bike ride while you're present with that emotion. So allowing it to move, for me, I take my emotions dancing or running or something else, move around, shake with them. It's another way of being with them. And sometimes that's also what's needed for them to start coming up. So I would say it's good to try out some different techniques or some different practices, some different ways into them. Yeah, sitting and meditating and then feeling, totally, but also moving around, take a walk, shadow boxing in the living room, whatever it is. Or if you play an instrument, if you sing, like, using the voice, let it out. Write a script for that situation, everything that wanted to be said by the anger but never was and was held in. Write it out and say it out loud. And start playing the role of an angry character and see what comes up. So Jody, I would say that being with it and allow it while also releasing. It's like, usually that's how it goes. The emotion wants to move. So when you sit with it and be with it, it's not like it will move eventually. And if it does feel stuck, then I would start move my body. Okay. Good. And a lot of people are responding here like that. They recognize that, wanting to go sit with an emotion, and there's nothing there, numbness, or not getting in touch with it. So good. Okay, good. Someone's sharing here. As you were speaking, I started crying for some reason, which is odd given that I've been numb all week. So thank you for that. Good. It's usually helpful. That's why it's so helpful to have a friend, a teacher, a guide, someone that can hold that space for us where it's allowed. And as we learn the self-mastery tools, we are also able to hold that space for ourselves. But often when we step into maybe our project manager or our hero fixer or our pleaser or our judge, definitely. And when we go into the identification of those, then we're not very present with the emotions. And our emotions and our other parts can feel that. And they're like, okay, it's not time now to let them out. So when a space is provided where it's like, it's okay, then emotion can often come out. So I'm glad. I'm glad that could open up some doors, maybe. Edward is asking, is there 2 or 3 meditation you do that might be good to practice for a while? Me finding there's so many. Well, there is the one in the intro to meditation and relaxation. It's kind of a longer workshop. It's a 1-hour workshop that I call How to Be Being with What Is. And in there, I kind of go through step by step a way of being with anything uncomfortable in your body or anything going on. And also kind of notice your reaction to whatever arises and then be present with that. So in there's, when you kind of condense that workshop, because it takes you to step by step and I talk around it, but if you only focus on that specific practice in there, then I would say that that's a really good one. And then for anyone who's got the Self-Mastery 1 course, of course, the releasing emotion exercise is really good. So just breathing into the emotion, giving it more space, giving it a channel to flow through is a really good one as well. So I would say those 2 meditations. And then for the rest of it, it's more like asking yourself, how am I feeling on a regular basis? And move around, let it move. Whether that's go out biking or whatever it is, but just Yeah, and that workshop, someone's asking, and that workshop is in the Self-Mastery community, which you can find. I mean, most of you are already on there. So in the Self-Mastery community, under the training that's called Intro to Meditation and Relaxation. And then there's a workshop in there, and that training is completely free. So you can just go in and access it. I can drop a link to it here also under the recording after. Okay. More questions, thoughts? Okay. They're finding the workshop. That's good. So Ed is asking, well, it seems to me that movement would take one's attention away from the emotion, thus not allowing it to be experienced fully. Is that your experience or is that your assumption? because it might not be that you are used to doing it that way, and therefore you haven't kind of paired those neural pathways. And I think especially if it would be like, okay, I bike a lot, or I run a lot. And if I would go out and do those movements, I would kind of go into my automated state, maybe a flow state where I just do that from. And from there, I'm not used to also paying attention, also being aware of my emotions. So maybe that takes a little more practice to do that while you're moving, especially with things that you're used to doing, if you often go biking or running or whatever it is. But I would say you can make your emotion practice be very intentful. So, okay, you might do a meditation where you're like, okay, I'm going to be present with this emotion. Am I feeling something? Am I not feeling something? What does that numbness feel like if I'm not feeling it? And then, okay, with the intent of anger or anything else, allowing it to arise, go move there and then. So not so much going into your old automated movement patterns, but if that is like, okay, I'm going to set up something I can box into, whether that's just a pillow or something around you that you're like, okay, I'm going to go move. And there's also kind of a protocol or a practice that we do in the Being Me mastermind where I show shaking. So, because if we say like, oh, go dance your emotions out, there might be big tension around, go dance my emotions out? Really? Like, who should I be? Some Martha Graham or what? And there's just like this big resistance to it. But if we talk about shaking, like as you're watching a nature show and you see that zebra running from that lion, and they escape, they get away, and then you see what they do. They shake it out. So I sometimes do a practice where I'm lying on the floor on my back and I pull my knees up and plant my feet into the ground. And then I just start wiggling. I start wiggling my pelvis and my legs and my upper body and my head, and just see what feels good. And sometimes that can be quite intense. It's like, okay, now things start moving and it just wants to release out and it wants to get bigger. The movement wants to get bigger. So the shaking is often something that can feel accessible to people, even if, the first few times you might feel a little crazy doing that and hoping that no one will walk in and see you doing that. But you'll get over that when you notice how good it feels to have a channel to let it out. Because a lot of the times, even if this is such a big part of this, moving from analyzing into sensing into feeling, because even if we think we got it all figured out, it's like, oh, I understand it now. I understand why I reacted that way. And I understand why this emotion comes up and I understand what it comes from. That doesn't help it release. It helps us probably let go of some anxiety and shift out of some judgments about it and not adding layers to it. So, I mean, that's super helpful. But releasing the emotion much more often needs to happen through the body. And the breathing, the releasing emotions through the breath is a really good first step for that. But there's more things to explore with it. So when you get a little adventurous and you're like, yeah, I want to get into this, then the shaking and other kind of movements might help. So, Ed, I don't know if that makes any sense when it comes to keeping the focus, the attention on the feeling itself while also moving. But it might, in many ways, I feel like it's the emotion moving me. Yeah, Marissa's sharing. I love this idea. I'm a dancer and I believe that emotions can get repressed in the body. So this is really useful. Yeah, it's a thing. It does. And I'm trained as a dancer too. And I know that for me that was a big outlet of emotion for a long time. But then being a dancer is very different from dancing often, because being a dancer now comes with an identity, and we train ourselves to move a specific way. Now it's about following rules. Now it's about doing the right steps. Now it's about accomplishing something often. I mean, it can go there. So for me, it was a lot about allowing myself to let go of my old training and start moving in a way that didn't, make any sense or didn't look like anything, but in a very intuitive way to the body, and kind of more holding the space for that emotion to do the movement than me again controlling the movement with my mind. So Jody is asking, can you speak to yoga and how it might help with moving from our head to our body? My body's asking me to do yoga, which I have little experience with, but feel drawn to it. I think that's an answer enough for me. If you feel drawn to it, do it. But it's definitely a good way of being present with our body. It's a good way of practicing being present with our body, because as anything, our any practice can become corrupt or be hijacked by the mind. I mean, you can go to a yoga class and the only thing you do throughout the whole class is thinking about if you're doing it right, whether you should be more flexible or stronger, or, that inner dialogue can be going through all of that, just as with any practice. But at least you are with your body in movement, and you're breathing with it, and you're getting someone guiding you to do that. So, I mean, the practices and the asanas, the positions, the postures of yoga are designed to help you also release tension in the body where we usually store it. Also, in and around our hips, in the back of our legs, in our shoulders. So when you start moving and doing those practices, it's kind of like going about it from the other end, and saying, if I move my body like this, what can have been stored here? And see what comes up. So I know for me, after sometimes doing yoga classes, I could have had an emotional release after going home and crying or feeling pissed off the rest of the day because something is coming up. And so I would say that if you feel drawn to it, then try it out, because it can definitely be a really very, very powerful way of putting your attention on your body and practicing being with it, especially when you practice noticing the mind game, trying to step in and maybe take over and say what you should be doing and not, and practice more and more being there in the now with your body. Ed is asking, would you say that there is a balance between shifting from head to the emotions, allowing only those actions which are helpful to self and others? I'm going to read that again because that's not entirely clear to me how you connect those two or what the connection is for you. But would you say that there is a balance between shifting from head to the emotion and allowing only those actions which are helpful to self and others? So I think I need some clarity on that one, Ed. Do you see, I partly read it like you see that there is a danger or there's some possibility that if we shifted into our emotions, we might be selfish or do things towards others that might not be okay. Yeah, am I on the right track there? Yeah, so this is a really good point, or a really good thing to kind of take apart and look at, because I mean, we've often related to our emotions in one of two ways, or we've been relating to it in both ways. We've been either relating by numbing it out, suppressing it, not allowing it, not getting in touch with it, judging it, saying it's not okay that it's there, because we've learned that from others as well growing up. Or we relate to it by completely getting overwhelmed by it, believing in the story it comes with, and lashing out at others. So then we would go with the emotion. We'd say, like, you caused this and you made me angry. And why did you do this? So, and that's not what I'm talking about is the answer when it comes to dropping into your body and start being with your emotions. Because it's so much about pulling apart the story, the justification about having the emotion, that a lot of times, in big majority moving through life, it's not the thing itself happening. It's not the situation around us that is causing the emotion. It's often a stored baggage of emotions that we're carrying with us, and neural pathways that have been practiced again and again and again to fire in the same way. So pulling apart the story, the meaning, the justification for the emotion, and being with the emotion itself are two quite, then they become two separate things. So it's not about that we should act them out towards others, but it's more about, if you want to release some stored emotions that are making them come out in these situations with other people and in your relationships and at work, then releasing the stored emotions is a really good idea, because now they won't show up with the same charge, with the same overwhelm that they would do otherwise. So now that you go in and release them, releasing emotions is not about screaming at someone else or lashing out at them or directing it towards anyone. It's a lot about being present and seeing all the labels, all the ideas that the mind wants to attach to that emotion. It was because of this. It's because of them. It's because you didn't. It's because. And when you allow yourself to sink through those layers, kind of take off those stickers, those labels, what's left? The experience of the emotion itself in the body. And learning to be present with that, and kind of learning to become friend with it, appreciate it, accept it at least, and not go into a similar, this shouldn't be here. So you're doing Jedi training in kind of, I'm okay with this experience of this emotion moving through my body. I can still be okay. I don't even have to react to it or act upon it. So I would say that this is much more of a practice that you do by yourself, that then will allow yourself to do that with others as well, where you don't have to speak from that emotion, but since it's being released in other times in your practice, and you're practicing being present with it, you become more and more skilled of being present with it, also with other people around and them triggering you, or you feel that impulse, and then okay, I feel anger right now, I feel frustration, I feel disappointment, it's moving in my body, it's okay. Because a lot of our reactions that comes out in relation to others is also because we can't stand that feeling in our body. So it's so much about befriending these emotions, being okay with having them. So for me, those two go hand in hand that you mentioned, Ed. Like shifting into emotion, into feeling. That's more something I talk about in the process of healing, in a process of self-mastery, in a process of moving from the hunter into the dreamer and creating the life that you want. It does not mean that the old way of being with emotions of just letting them come out everywhere and at everyone. And with that, taking actions that are helpful towards others and self will often come through releasing these emotions and taking the stories and the emotional experience apart. Okay, good. Glad it helped. Vanda is sharing, when I'm in depression, I do not feel any energy to move, just want to do nothing. Difficult to connect to the body. Yeah. Yeah, what you're describing is the very normal state of the depression. And it has, when we're in depression, our emotions are numbed out, both the highs and the lows. So it's this, and of course that has an effect both kind of chemically in the body, that our adrenal glands and are often exhausted, and they're not producing chemicals and hormones in the same way anymore. So it's like we can't get that little injection of chemicals to experience those emotions. So that's more the physiological explanation behind it. So when we're in depression, trying to go for the emotions or feel them might not be the time for that. We can still do that in a kind of gentle and kind way. But if we're setting the judge or the project manager on it and say, hey, you should be feeling emotions now, you should go out, move, when the system might be exhausted and right now just need to recharge before it's time to get in touch with emotions and feel them again. I also believe there are phases to it. And at times when, we often go into that depressed state because we have had a heightened sense of strong emotions for a long time. Anxiety or fear or not feeling safe or anger even. So it's like our system gets depleted. And stress, of course. But that's a lot of those emotions will kind of drive us into a stress response. Something needs to be done. I need to get safe. So that stress state, up in that high beta brainwave state, and when our whole system is constantly working, will eventually put us into overwhelmed, depleted state. So in a way, if you look at it that way, it's a super smart system. It's like, okay, you've been in stress too long. We're going to put you down for a while here. We got no more kicks to give you. No more dopamine, no more adrenaline, no more cortisol. It's like, no, we're just going to put you down. But again, we tend to respond to, of course, to depression. Is also stigma around it. It's like, I shouldn't be in this state. That's not good. It's not accepted. I should feel better soon. I should get my shit together. But when understanding where it comes from, and that from being in a state of stress for a long time, we kind of need that exhaustion to recover and recharge. It's like, okay, yeah. Just like we pass out, when we don't have blood going through our head. It's like it's not the passing out that's a problem. It's that the blood wasn't going to our head. So it's a smart mechanism that we pass out or that we throw up because there's something poisonous or something bad in our system. It's not the throwing up that's the problem, but it's like what was put there, and this is a defense mechanism. So with that, I know for me at least, it was easier for me to have more compassion towards my own depression or towards those states. It's like, okay, I understand why they're there, and maybe it's not my job or to recruit these parts to go push that state and say you should be doing something else. And then of course there are studies like, oh, depression, you feel better when you're out, you feel better when you move, you will start increasing that. So it's also about that balance of not getting into the complete apathy of it and believing the stories that nothing will ever be possible again for you. No, it's a phase and you can move out of it. And like we talk about in the meditation course, Beyond the Mind, there are many parts of the brain that we can help grow, like and shrink. For example, often when we've been in stress and when we're depressed, our amygdala is larger. And when we meditate, the size of the amygdala will decrease. And that will faster shift you out of a depressed state. So there are things that can be done like that. So I'm not saying that it's just to kind of give up and give in and say, oh, there's nothing I can do, but also allowing that, okay, no, when I'm depressed, that might not be the right time to go release big emotions. Yeah, good is often what helps to talk about it. And the confession, I was like, this is what I'm experiencing, this is what I'm feeling, and not having to manage it inside of ourselves and like, okay, let's cover this up and let's make sure I feel better tomorrow, and but instead, like, this is my experience right now, and reach out, reach out for help and support. It's super, super important. And know that there are things out there that will help that state. A lot of studies on it, with meditation, with fresh air, so some of those things we might force ourselves to do just because it's like, okay, I'm going to get at least 2 of these things done during the day because I know over time they will help me. It's me taking charge and saying, okay, yeah, I'm going to be that annoying grown up that tells me to go out, play in the sun for a while and just get some fresh air with myself. And yeah, but that, I think that state of acceptance also with it, and not trying to have it go away with that fear of it. Oh, Ed, you're asking like a favorite question ever. Since emotion seems to only be generated through external situations, how can one produce a desired emotion at will without the external stimuli? That it's the most fun thing to learn. Because I would say that it's just what you say here. It seems to be generated through external situations, but it's not. It's generated inside of you. An emotional response is always generated inside of you. But yes, we have connected certain things around us in our external world and situations to that response. So again, neural pathways firing. And we have been programmed to do it with certain external things. Oh, going on a roller coaster, woo, responding, feeling it in our bodies. And yeah, we're also being taken for a physical ride there. So it's, and being tickled and everything that kind of is very physical is one thing. But then, looking out at a beautiful landscape or connecting with someone that you care for deeply or getting that job that you want. If we start looking at the beliefs that are related with that situation, with that event, then we often can start seeing how and why we respond the way we do in that situation. So first thing is, if your question is, how can one produce a desired emotion at will without the external stimuli? Well, first of all, recognize this. Be very curious and mindful when you're having a strong emotion from something external. Maybe you do some inventory and look at, what did that mean? What does that mean to my program? Having a beautiful piece of cake make me feel so good, or whatever it is. What is it? Is this something that feels like a reward? Does that mean I've done something good? Is it just enjoyment and pleasure in the body? Like, what is it that gives that emotional response? And we start becoming curious about that, and you start seeing that, well, okay, it's these beliefs that creates the emotional response. Well, now, can I produce this emotional response in other situations as well? I mean, the brain is like this big electrical tapestry that just keeps changing and changing, and it keeps responding to what we're doing to it, what we're doing with it. And there are neuroscientists that says, doing research on, the ability that we take for granted, the ability of hearing, the ability of seeing in babies and toddlers, that in the beginning, that's not a skill that we have. We have the ability, we have the circumstances to be able to see at one point. We have the eyes and we have the processor and have the signal between them. But in the beginning, that's not a given that we will see. To be able to start seeing, we need to start processing data. So we need to receive data through our eyes, light hitting our eyes and being traveling into our brain and start processing. And in the beginning, we won't even process that into images. It won't make any sense to us. But as the brain keeps receiving the data again and again and again, it starts creating shapes. Let's draw a picture. A tree, a lamp. And now we have gained the skill, gained the ability to see in the sense that we call, a human sense. So we're just fascinating beings. So being able to create an emotion, it's a superpower. It's a skill that we have. And when you start pulling it apart from the conditions, like the conditioned things, and you start producing them inside of you, you can absolutely, I've reprogrammed a lot of those things in me, even with doing deep with exactly what we're talking about now. Okay, what's your emotional response to having an uncomfortable emotion showing up? If normally, if you would start feeling anxiety in your body, and previously you would go, oh shit, that's here again, or dread, or fear, or stress about it. And you might think, well, that's because of the anxiety. Well, it's because of the beliefs that you have about the anxiety, and that it's bad, and that it shouldn't be here, and that it's going to cause troubles, and all of that. But that's what we're doing right now in a way. We're saying, what if these emotions were allowed? What if it's all okay that anxiety is there? What if it would be accepted and welcomed? Then what's happening? Then what would happen? And now you are changing your emotional response to having a certain emotion, for example. So this has been completely reprogrammed inside of me. I can do little happy dances instead of having an uncomfortable emotion, because it's like, wow, that's cool. Allow it. Okay, what is this experience when I don't have the same program of judgments about it? So now it's more like this curiosity and this, ooh, this is an interesting experience. I am consciousness in this human body, experiencing through it. And from a consciousness perspective, from what the Toltecs would call a third attention, from outside of consciousness perspective, there's no bad or good emotions. They're just experiences to be had. And when we remove those labels of the mind, or just at least see that our mind program have labeled them certain ways, then we're more free to just experience them the way they are. Did that make any sense at all? I felt I went on a little tangent there, because I think this topic is so interesting, fascinating. But you can very much so change and produce even an emotional response. That's what you're already doing. You're just not aware of it. It seems like it's because of the external circumstances, but you are creating it. Yeah, Janine is asking, but I guess we can only allow ourselves to feel those scary emotions if we have the skills to detach from those characters, because otherwise those emotions and stories might overcome us. Okay. Yes. I mean, this is why we start the self-mastery work with stepping out into the observer, step by step, and not just saying, hey, step into the observer, but here, take some actions, and you will have made your way out into the observer. And that's why we don't start here. That's why we don't start with, okay, so go feel your emotions, go drop into your body and just be with them. That would never had worked for me. I would either be overwhelmed, overrun by them, or like, what the hell are you talking about? I don't have emotions. I'm fine. I'm okay. In complete denial of having them, or, So yes, this is a building of skills, and it's a process. And a lot of what I'm talking about in this podcast, and as I kind of covered in the first episode, is this journey from the victim state into the hunter, and onward into the dreamer and the artist of your life. And that journey has many phases, and we can't really skip ahead. We need to learn certain skills before we need to learn to move our arms and our legs before we can swim. It's like, and then we have to put them together to work together and float and breathe and relax and all of that and find the rhythm. So yes, stepping out into the observer, detach, unidentify with the characters at least well enough to observe them, at least well enough to say, hey, what's going on here? Who's doing what? And being skeptical about that. That comes first. That skill is the whole foundation. But we can also get trapped there. We can get stuck there in trying to analyze and be skeptical and trying to figure every piece out of our mind and how it works. And that's when it's time to, okay, next skill level, next level of the game. Let's start being accepting of the emotions without believing the character story that comes with it. And Norm is going to try doing a happy dance next time the anxiety shows up. That will be a disruption, I will say, to that whole program. So sometimes it's fun to be rebellious like that and be all happy about it coming up and go against the judge. I like that.
It's very counterintuitive for sure.
Definitely very counterintuitive, and which makes my rebel thinks it's fun. So I can recruit another character that's like, yeah, let's totally do that next time. That'll be fun. Mess with the others. Thank you, Norm. Eddie says, the observer observes the emotions or blends with them, or both. The observer observes the emotions, but the observer can allow the body to feel the emotion. So it doesn't have to be this detached, oh, what's going on over here? And I'm looking at it from a distance. The emotion can still be felt. I mean, you can even allow the characters to feel the emotions without the stories. Or without the stories can be there. It's totally fine. Let them play the stories, but the question is, do you believe them or not? Have you stepped into the perspective of them? The observer observes the emotions. The observer observes the body having the experience of feeling the emotion. So the observer for me develops over time, or the experience of the observer deepens. When I started this process, it was much more of a character, an ally character, that I gave a task like, okay, you're going to observe what these other people are doing in here in my mind. You're the one who's going to play detective and kind of go stalk them and find out and observe. So in a way, that observer had an agenda. But that's totally fine. That's the perfect. We need that kind of hunter, warrior, ally character with us on the journey. But as we evolve, as our awareness grows in this process, today the observer is much more the sense of consciousness for me. So that sense of the observer is much deeper. It's much more vast than it was in the beginning when I started the process. And Janine is asking, I talked to a therapist just now for the first time in my life and was thinking, doesn't answering all their questions reinforce the victim stories? How do we distinguish between just stating, accepting what is, where we're at this moment, versus reinforcing those stories during therapy sessions? I do feel some resistance inside myself asking why I need this other person to talk to. Or is this just a necessary step of allowing the victim to be heard? I think it definitely starts with this awareness that you're giving it right now. Because what you're describing is something that happens a lot in talk therapy or in, friend talk therapy, or, just talking to a friend or chatting with someone that you trust in. Before we have this awareness of the characters or any other way of describing your mind doing what it's doing, but telling a story and the beliefs, understanding the beliefs underneath, yes, it will often be a reinforcement of the victim stories. But it can be done. You can go to therapy and you can have this awareness like that you're just describing here. And you can sit there and you can kind of observe it and you can say, hey, what's the tone in here? Or let me try to allow the victim to express the whole time, to express what it's feeling. How does that feel? And what if I go back the next time and I talk about it as, yeah, there's a part of me that feels this and this and this. It hasn't been heard before. And there's another part that says this and this and this about it. So I think we can be in therapy and we can still talk about this and allow them to express with awareness without having to reinforce their stories. But if we just step in there and they ask us, so what's been happening and what's been going on? And we're just like, and then they did this, and then this happened, and then I felt this way. It's like, I, and not recognizing that it's one of the characters talking and that you're actually not it. So allowing the victim to be heard is good, but if it's just the victim speaking from the identification with it, it's not so much that it's allowed to be heard and expressed. It's much more that it's reinforcing the hurt and the pain and the trauma and believing more and more in the story. But if you can be there and be present with it and say, hey, how are you feeling? If you're also part of that, the therapist in the chair asking the questions. So this was a big awakening moment for me when I was in therapy. And at that point I was in couples therapy, and I just had this, there's something that feels so off here. Like we're talking about it as the other person should be responsible for my emotions. And I didn't have a solution or another option for it yet, an alternative, but I just felt that felt off. So I think if you also experiment a little bit and feel into like, what feels good from integrity, then I think there's a way of navigating that and being allowed the space, if you trust a therapist, then to navigate it in a way that's not reinforcing, but actually healing and clearing. You want to say something, Eddie, or did you just...
Oh, yeah, I did, Ava.
Hi.
Hi. The observer, I still haven't got that quite straight. Are you saying that the observer is actually a character that maybe evolves into something else? I never quite looked at it as a character. Kind of follow me there?
Yeah. I know it was for me when I started and I heard the observer, because at that point, I didn't have any sense of consciousness. That wasn't a thing for me. I'd lived stuck in my mind, hearing all these stories, talking back and forth. And then my first notion of an observer then was someone inside of my mind that would be observing the other parts of my mind. So that's just how I started at that point. But then as I started to really explore that and deepen that and see, well, wait a minute, my observer has some agendas too and some beliefs, and it's going for an outcome here. Like, what if I take those beliefs apart? What's left of it? So I kept stripping away from it, and then the experience of that observer changed. And today it's just a word, another word for me for consciousness, or for a more neutral place within ourselves where we can witness all parts of our experience, in the body, in the emotional body, our mind, the external.
Yeah, for me, it was when we did that exercise in the meditation class where we turned the observer around and looked inside or at the observer itself. That's when I knew it seemed to be something more than a character, that it was kind of like the core. I don't know if core is the right word, but, kind of like the essence of, I hate to say the word identity, but kind of, I don't know. I don't even know how to describe that.
No, there's not many good words for it.
Okay.
we go fumbling around for words, but no word will really. But I know what you're getting at, or I think I feel what you're getting at, and it's that because the observer, even when we become aware of the observer, and if we start the self-mastery work, maybe with self-mastery courses, and we recruit kind of a character that does the hunting for us, the attention is still directed somewhere, away from the observer. So it's directed outwards, whether that's on our characters, our parts, or something around us. But when we do that exercise that you're talking about, when we take that force of our attention, our energy, and we turn it 180 degrees and direct it back home to the source, that can be a very powerful experience and really deepen that sense of the observer.
Very much so. Thank you, Ava.
Thank you, Wendy. Okay, unless there are no other urgent questions that wants to be asked, then speak now or forever hold your tongue, or what do they say in this? No, that's another. That's not these situations, huh? I think we'll finish for today. Thank you so much.